In the quiet of the evening, where shadows softly play, a fairy tale wolf sheds his skin, gently drifting away, with a twinkle in his eye and a heart full of dreams. He waits for the Friday night glow, where the magic redeems. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. He picks up a book, the pages worn and wise, every line a whisper under the vast skies, from far off lands where the wild things roam, to enchanted forests where the heart finds home. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. With every word he reads, he casts a spell of peace, transporting all who listen to a land where joy won't cease. For in these fairy tales, amidst the laughter and tears, the wolf finds his solace, he conquers his fears. As the night grows deeper, he serenades the moon with melodies that linger.
Hey everyone, how we doing? We have survived until Friday. Congrats on getting first guilty, congrats on getting third skeleton, even though you kinda did it in the wrong order. And thank you for lurking, Salty. A 15 stream streak. People streaking in my chat. Let's see, guilty's on 10. Let's see, guilty's on 10, salty's on 15, and skeleton's here, so. I hope everyone's had a fairly decent second week of the year. I guess this is technically the third Thursday since I'm on part 3 of this book, which I started this year. Well, third Friday. I don't know what day of the week it is, except that it's Friday and I do fairy tales. But yeah. And look, I have 2 cats on camera. I really need to fix how the cat camera is set up. Because it doesn't fill in this window all the way, but it fills in the other ones too much. But I have everything cat related – separated in its own little group, so I can just move it between places. And it's either blowing a lot of dust outside, or it might be snowing. I would like to see snow. I've got nothing to do tomorrow except edit video. And if anyone missed last night, the bird conquering at Dead Man's Corner is going to be an interesting boat to get through, because it is historical. Yeah, it's in my area. It's most likely dust, but it would be nice to see snow. It's cold enough for it. We just haven't gotten any. There's a Sensino in chat. Everything makes you chill to the bone, unless it's hot. Then it's just toasting them. Anyway, let's get over to the fairy tale screen. See? Cats are here too. Yeah, dry bones aren't nearly as much fun to chew on. But yeah. I'm not chewing on any of them that you use. Besides, chewing on bones keeps my teeth clean. Weird. Oh, that was yours? I guess I'd need to find it again. There was, humorous burying it. See, we're already... This was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're on the 12th story already. So we're over a third of the way through this book. We're over a third, I'll say that. This next one looks like it might be a little bit longer because it says it's adventures, so there's more than one part to it. So if everyone wants to get comfy, cozy, get a nice warm beverage on a cold freaking January night. I'm glad it's actually going to get cold tonight. It's going to be cold tomorrow. Not cold enough for us, the bugs to die, but, you know, cold enough. But, let's see. Our first story. I guess it helps to have fur, as fur makes cold weather a lot more enjoyable. Makes it so I can tolerate going out instead of all the heat I usually get. I'm sure I shed enough of it in the summer to make a coat. Now, if you're going to get a Mew fur coat, you'd have to find a cat. Okay, story time. So, our first story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales, which, from the looks of it, this is the 19th book I've done for Friday Night Fairy Tales. The Strange Adventures of Little Maia. Once upon a time there lived a woman who had a pretty cottage and a garden right in the middle of the forest. All through the summer she was quite happy tending her flowers and listening to the birds singing in the trees. But in the winter, when snow lay on the ground and wolves came howling about the door, she felt very lonely and frightened. Well, if she'd let them in, she wouldn't be lonely or frightened, now would she? If only she had a child to speak to, however small, what a comfort it would be, she said to herself. And the heavier the snow fell, the oftener she repeated the words. And at last the day arrived when she could bear the silence and solitude no longer, and she set off to walk to the nearest village to beg someone to sell her or to lend her a child. The snow was very deep and reached above her ankles, and it took her almost an hour to get a few hundred yards. It will be dark at this rate before I get to the first house, thought she, and stopped to look about her. Suddenly, a little woman in a high-crowned hat stepped from behind a tree in front of her. "This is a bad day for walking. Are you going far?" inquired the little woman. "Well, I want to go to the village, but I don't see how I'm ever going to get there," answered the other. "And may I ask what is important business that takes you there?" asked the little woman, who was really a witch. "My house is so dreary with no one to speak to. I cannot stay in it alone, and I am seeking for a child. I don't mind how small she is, who will keep me company." "Oh, if that is all, you need go no further," replied the witch, putting her hand in her pocket. "Look, here is a barley corn. As a favor, you will have to pot it for 12 shillings. As a favor, you shall have it for 12 shillings, and if you can plant it in a flower pot and give it plenty of water, in a few days you will see something wonderful." This promise raised the woman's spirits. She gladly paid down the price, and as soon as she returned home, she dug a hole in a flower pot and put in the seed. For 3 days she waited, hardly taking her eyes from the flower pot in its warm corner, and on the third morning she saw that, while she was asleep, a tall red tulip had shot up and sheathed its green leaves. "Oh, what a beautiful blossom!" cried the woman, stooping to kiss it, when, as she did so, the red petals burst asunder, and in the midst of them was a lovely little girl, only an inch high. This tiny little creature was seated on a mattress of violets and covered with a quilt of rose leaves, and she opened her eyes and smiled at the woman as if she had known her all of her life. "Oh, you darling, I shall never be lonely any more," she exclaimed in rapture, and the baby nodded her head as much to say, "Oh, of course you won't." The woman lost no time in seeking for a roomy walnut shell, which she lined thickly with white satin, and on it she placed the mattress with the child, whom she called Maia, upon it. This was her bed, and stood in a chair close to where her foster mother was sleeping. But in the morning she was lifted out and placed on a leaf in the middle of a large bowl of water, and given 2 white horsehairs to row herself about with it. She was the happiest baby that was ever seen, and passed the whole day singing to herself in a language of her own that nobody else could understand. So far, this is Thumbelina. For some weeks, the two lived together and never grew tired of each other's society, and then a terrible misfortune happened. One night, while her foster mother lay sound asleep after a hard day's work, a big, ugly, wet frog hopped through the window and stood staring at Maia under her quilt of rose leaves. "Dear me, that is a lovely little girl," thought the frog to herself. "She would make a nice wife for my son." And, picking up the walnut cradle in her mouth, she hopped with it to the edge of the stream which ran through the garden. "Come and see what I've brought you," called the old frog when she had reached her home in the mud. "Rot, rot, rot," uttered the son, gazing with pleasure at the sleeping child. "Hush, you don't want to make such noise or you'll wake her," whispered the mother. "I mean her to be a wife for you, and while we are preparing for the wedding, we will set her on the water lily leaf in the middle of the brook, so that she may not be able to run away from us." Yes, this is definitely Thumbelina. Different story, different names, I don't know. It was on this green floating prison that Maia woke, frightened and puzzled, with the first rays of the sun. She stood up straight on the leaf, looking about her for a way to escape, and finding none, she sat down again and began to weep bitterly. At length her sobs were heard by the old frog, who was busy in her house at the bottom of the marsh, twisting rushes into a soft carpet for Maia's feet, and twining reeds and grapes over the doorway to make it look pretty for the bride. "But the poor child feels lost and unhappy," she thought pitifully, with her heart that was kind. "Well, I have just done, and then my son and I will go and fetch her. When she sees how handsome she is, she will be all smiles again." And in a few minutes they both appeared beside the leaf. "This is your future husband. Did you ever see anyone like him?" asked the proud mother, pushing him forward. But after one glance, Maia only cried the more, and the little fishes who lived in the stream came swimming around to see what was the matter. "It is absurd that such a pretty creature should be forced to... Oh, it's supposed to be fish. "It is absurd that such a pretty creature should be forced to take a husband whom she does not want," they said to each other. "And such an ugly one, too. However, we can easily prevent it." And by turns they gnawed at the stem of the lily leaf close to the root, till at length it was free, and taking it in their mouths they bore Maia away, till the little stream grew into a great river. Oh, how Maia enjoyed that voyage, when once she became quite certain that the frogs could no longer reach her. And past many towns she went, and the people on the banks all turned to look at her and exclaimed, "What a lovely little girl! Where can she have come from?" "What a lovely little girl!" twittered the birds in the bushes, and a blue butterfly fell in love with her and would not leave her. So she took off her sash, which just matched him, and tied it around his body, so that, with his new kind of horse, he traveled much faster than before. Unluckily, a great cockchafer who was buzzing over the river happened to catch sight of her and caught her up in his claws. The poor butterfly was terribly frightened at the sight of him, and he struggled hard to free himself, so that the sash bow gave way, and he flew off into the sunshine. But Maia wasn't so fortunate, and though the cockchafer collected honey from the flowers for his dinner, he told her several times how pretty she was, and she could not feel at ease with him. The cockchafer noticed this and summoned his sisters to play with her, but they only stared rudely and said, "Where did you pick this up strange object? She is very ugly, and that is sure, but one ought to pity her, for she has only 2 legs." "Yes, and no feelers," added Mother. And she is so thin that, well, our brother has certainly an odd taste. Indeed, he has. And they repeated it so loud and so often that, in the end, he believed it too. And snatching her up from the tree where he had placed her, he set her down upon a daisy which grew near the ground. Here Maya stayed for the whole summer, and really was not at all unhappy. She ventured to walk about by herself, and wove herself a bed of some blades of grass, and placed it under the clover leaf for shelter. And red cups that grew in the moss held as much dew as she wanted, and the cockchafer had taught her how to get honey. But summer does not last forever, and by the flowers withered. And instead of dew, there was snow and ice. Maia did not know what to do, for her clothes were torn to rags, and though she tried to roll herself up in a dry leaf, it broke under her fingers. It was soon plain to her that if she could not get some other shelter, she would die of hunger and cold. So, gathering up all her courage, she left the forest and crossed the road into what had been, in the summer, So, gathering up all her courage, she left the forest and crossed the road into what had been, in the summer, a beautiful field of waving corn, but was now only a mass of hard stalks. She wandered on, seeing nothing but the sky above her head, till she suddenly found herself close to an opening which seemed to lead underground. "It will be warm at any rate," thought Maia, "and perhaps the person who lives there will give me something to eat. At any rate, it can't be worse off than I am now." And she walked boldly down the passage. By and by she came to a door which stood ajar, and peeping in, discovered a whole room full of corn. This gave her heart, and she went on more swiftly till she reached a kitchen, where an old field mouse was baking a cake. "Oh, you poor animal!" cried the mouse, who had never seen anything like her before. "You look starved to death. Come and sit here and get warm and share my dinner with me." Maia almost wept with joy at the old mouse's kind words. She needed no second bidding, but ate more than she had ever done in her life, though it was not a breakfast for a hummingbird. When she had quite finished, she put out her hand and smiled, and the old mouse said to her, "Can you tell me stories? If you may stay with me till the sun gets hot again, and you shall keep me with my house. But it is dull here in the winter unless you've got somebody clever enough to amuse you." Yes, Maia had learned a great many stories from her foster mother, and besides, there were all her own adventures, and her escapes from death. She also knew how to sweep a room, and never failed to get up early in the morning and have everything clean and tidy for the old mouse. So the winter passed away pleasantly, and Maia began to talk of the spring, and of the time when she would go out into the world again and seek her fortune. "Oh, you need not begin to think of that for a while yet," answered the field mouse. "Up on earth they have a proverb. When the day lengthens till the cold strengthens, it has never been quite warm up to now, and the snow may fall at any time. Never a winter goes by without it, and then you'll be very thankful you are here and not outside. But I dare say it is quiet for a young thing like you," she added. "And I've invited my neighbor the mole to come and pay us a visit. He's been asleep all these months, but I hear he is waking up again. You would be a lucky girl if he took you to marry you. Only, unfortunately, he is blind and cannot see how pretty you are." In this blindness, Maia felt truly glad, for she did not want a mole for a husband. However, by and by he paid his promised visit, and Maia did not like him at all. He might be rich and learned as possible, but he hated the sun and the trees and the flowers and all that Maia loved best. To be sure, being blind, he had never seen them, and like many other people, he thought that anything he did not know was not worth knowing. But Maia's tales amused him, though he would not for the world have let her see it, and he admired her voice when she sang. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? Hush-a-bye, baby, on the treetop. Though he told her that it was all nonsense, and the trees and gardens were more foolish. When she was his wife, he would teach her things better worth learning. Meanwhile, he said with a grand air, I have borrowed a passage from this house to my own, in which you can walk, but I warn you not to be frightened by a great dead creature that has fallen through a hole in the roof and is lying on one side. What sort of creature is it? Asked Maia eagerly. Oh, I really can't tell you, answered the mole indifferently. It is something covered with something soft, and it has 2 thin legs and a sharp sting sticking out of its head. It's a bird, cried Maria joyfully. I love birds. It must have died of cold, she added, dropping her voice. Oh, good Mr. Mole, do take me to see it. Come then, as I'm going home, replied the mole, and calling to the old field mouse to accompany them, they set out. Here it is, said the mole at last. Dear me, how thankful I am fate did not make me a bird. They can't say anything but twit, twit, and die at the first breath of cold. Yes, poor useless creature, answered the field mouse. But while they were talking, Maia crept around to the other side and stroked the feathers of the little swallow and kissed his eyes. All that night she lay awake, thinking of the swallow lying dead in the passage. At length she could bear it no longer and stole away to the place where the hay was kept, and wove a thick carpet. Next she went to the field mouse's store of cotton, which she picked in the summer for some of the marsh flowers, and carrying them both down the passage, she took the cotton underneath the bird and spread the hay quilt over him. Perhaps you were one of the swallows who sang to me in the summer, she said. I wish I could have brought you to life again, but now, goodbye. And she laid her face, wet with tears, on the breast of the bird. Surely she felt a faint movement against her cheek. Yes, there it was again. Suppose the bird was not dead after all, but only senseless with cold and hunger. And at this thought Maria that she hastened back to the house, and brought some grains of corn, and a drop of water and a leaf. This she held close to the swallow's beak, which he opened unconsciously, and when she sipped the water she gave him one of the grains one by one. Make no noise so that no one may guess that you are not dead, she said. Tonight I will bring you some more food, and I will tell the mole that he must stuff up the hole again, as it makes a passage too cold for me to walk in. And now, farewell. And she went back to the field mouse and was sound asleep. After some days of Maia's careful nursing, the swallow felt strong enough to talk, and he told Maia how he came to the place where she found him. Before, he was big enough to fly very high, and had torn his wing on a rosebush, so that he could not keep up with his family and friends when they took their departure to warmer lands. In their swift course, they never noticed that their little brother was not with them, and at last he dropped to the ground from sheer fatigue, and must have rolled down into the hole into the passage. It was very lucky for the swallow that both the mole and his field mouse friend thought he was dead, and did not trouble about him, so that when spring really came, and the sun was hot, and the blue hyacinthus grew in the woods and primroses in the hedges, he was as tall and strong as any of his companions. You have saved my life, dear little Maia, he said, but now the time has come for me to leave you. Unless, he added, you will let me carry you on my back far away from this gloomy prison. Maia's eyes sparkled at the thought, but she shook her head bravely. Yes, you must go, but I must stay behind, she answered. The field mouse has been good to me, and I cannot desert her like that. Do you think you can open the hole for yourself? She asked anxiously. If so, you had better begin now, for this evening we are to have supper with the mole, and it would never do for my foster mother to find you working at it." "This is true," answered the swallow, and flying up to the roof, which, after all, was not very high above him, he set to work with his bill, and soon let a flood of sunshine into the dark place. "Won't you come with me, Maia?" he said. Though her heart longed for the trees and flowers, she answered as before, "No, I cannot." That one glimpse of the sun was all Maia had for some time, for the corn sprung up so quickly over the hole and about the house that there was almost as well have been no sun at all. However, though she missed her bird friend every moment, she had no leisure to be idle, for the field mouse had told her that very soon she was being married to the mole, and kept her spinning wool and cotton for her outfit. And as she had never in her life made a dress, 4 clever spiders were persuaded to spend the days underground, turning the wool and cotton into tiny garments. Maia liked the clothes, but hated the thought of the blind mole, only she did not know how to escape him. In the evenings, when the spiders were going to their homes for the night, she would walk with them to the door and wait till a puff of wind blew the corn ears apart, and she could see the sky. "If the swallow would only come now," she said to herself, "I would go with him to the end of the world." But he never came. "Your outfit is almost finished," said the field mouse one day when the berries were red and the leaves yellow, "and the mole and I have decided that your wedding shall be in 4 weeks' time." "Oh, not so soon, not so soon," cried Maria, bursting into tears, which made the field mouse very angry, and declared that Maia had no more sense than other girls, and did not know what was good for her. Then the mole arrived and carried her on his back to see the new house he had dug for her, which was so very far underground that Maia's tiny legs could never bring up even as high as the field mouse's dwelling, from which she might see the sunlight. Her heart grew heavier and heavier as the days went by, and on the last evening of all she crept out into the field among the stubble and watched the sun set before she bade it goodbye forever. "Farewell, farewell," she said, "and farewell to my little swallow. Oh, if only he knew he would come to help me." "Twit, twit," cried a voice above her, and the swallow fluttered to the ground beside her. "You look sad. Are you really going to let that ugly mole marry you?" "I shall soon die, that is comfort," she said, weeping, but the swallow only said, "Tut, tut, get on my back, as I told you before, and I will take you to the land where the sun always shines, and you will soon forget such a creature as a mole ever existed." "Yes, I will come," said Maia. Then the swallow tore off the cornstalks with a strong beak and bade her to tie it safely to his wing, and they started off, flying south for many a day. Oh, how happy Maia was to see the beautiful earth again. 100 times she longed for the swallow to stop, but he always told her that he was best yet, and they flew on, only halting for short rests until they reached a place covered with tall white marble pillars, some standing high, wreathed with vines, out of which endless swallow heads were peeping, others lying stretched among the flowers, white, yellow, and blue. "I live up there," said the swallow, pointing to the tallest of one of the pillars. "But such a house would never do for you, as you would only fall out of it and kill yourself. So choose one of the flowers below, and you shall have it for your own, and sleep all night curled up in its leaves." "I will have that one," answered Maia, pointing to a yellow flower shaped like a star, with a tiny crinkled wreath of red and yellow in its center, and a long stem that swayed in the wind. "That one is the prettiest of all, and it smells so sweet." Then the swallow flew down towards it, but as it drew near, they saw a little mannikin with a crown on his head and wings on his shoulders, balancing himself on one of the leaves. "Ah, that is the king of the flower spirits," whispered the swallow, and the king stretched out his hands to Maia and helped her jump off the swallow's back. "I've waited for you a long time," he said, "and now you have come to at last to be my queen." And Maia smiled and stood behind him as all the fairies that dwelt in the flowers ran to fetch presents for her. And the best of all was a pair of lovely gauzy blue wings to help her fly about like one of themselves. Instead of marrying a mole, little Maia was crowned a queen, and the fairies danced round her in a ring while the swallows sang the wedding song. Yep, that is absolutely Thumbelina. So I wonder who they would have translated that one from, because it doesn't credit anyone for that story. And Thumbelina is definitely Hans Christian Andersen. This is one of the Punjabi stories that they always talk about Major Campbell doing. Okay. Our next story for tonight, Diamond Cut Diamond. In a village in Hindustan, there once lived a merchant who, although he rose early, worked hard, and rested late, remained very poor, and ill luck so dogged him that he determined at last to go to some distant country and try his fortune there. 12 years passed by. His luck had turned, and now he had gathered great wealth, so that having plenty to keep him in comfort for the rest of his days, he thought once more of his native village, where he desired to spend the remainder of his life among his own people. In order to carry his riches with him in safety over the many weary miles that lay between him and his home, he bought some magnificent jewels, which he locked up in a little box and wore concealed upon his person, and, so as to not draw attention of the thieves who infested the highways and made their living by robbing travelers, he started off on one of the poor clothes of a man who had nothing to lose. Thus prepared, he traveled quickly, and within a few days' journey from his own village came to a city where he determined to buy better garments. And now that he was no longer afraid of thieves, to look much more like the rich man he had become. In his new raiment he approached the city, and near the great gate he found a bazaar, where, amongst many shops filled with costly silks, carpets, and all other kinds of goods from other countries, was one finer than all the rest. There amidst the goods, spread out to the best advantage, sat the owner, smoking a long silver pipe, and there the merchant bent his steps and saluted to the owner politely, and sat down also, and began to make some purchases. Now, the proprietor of the shop, Bika Mole by name, was a very shrewd man, and as he and the merchant conversed, he soon felt that his customer was richer than he seemed, and was trying to conceal that fact. Certain purchases having been made, he invited the newcomer to refresh himself, and in a short time they were chatting pleasantly together. In the course of the conversation, Bika Mole asked the merchant where he was traveling, and hearing the name of the village, he observed, "Ah, you had better be careful on that road. It's a very bad place for thieves." The merchant turned pale at these words. It would be such a bitter thing, he thought, just to end his journey to be robbed of all the fortune he had heaped up with such care. His bland and prosperous Bika Mole must surely know the best, so presently he said, "Lalaji, would you oblige me by locking up for me a small box for a short while? Once I get to my village, I could bring back 6 sturdy men of my own kinfolk and claim it again." The Lala shook his head. "I could not do it," he replied. "I am sorry, but such things are not my business. I should be afraid to undertake it." "But," pleaded the merchant, "I know no one in the city, and you must surely have some place to keep your own precious things. Do this, I pray you, as a great favor." Still, Bika Mole politely but firmly refused. But the merchant, feeling that now he had betrayed the fact that he was richer than he seemed, and being loth to make more people aware of it by inquiring elsewhere, continued to press him until at last he consented. The merchant produced a little box of jewels, and Beeka Mole locked it up for him in a strong chest with other precious stones, and so, with many promises and compliments, they parted. In a place like an eastern bazaar, where the shops lie with wide open fronts, and with their goods displayed not only within but without terraces and verandas, raised a few feet above the public roadway, such a long talk as that between Beeka Mole and the merchant would not but attract some attention from the other shopkeepers in the narrow street. If a merchant had known it, nearby every shop owner was in the district was a thief, and the cleverest and biggest of all was Beeka Mole. But he did not know it, only he could not help feeling a little uneasy at having thus parted with all his wealth to a stranger. And so, as he wandered down the street, making a purchase here and there, he managed in one way or another to ask some questions about the honesty of Beeka Mole. And each rascal whom he spoke to, knowing that there would be some good reason in the question, and hoping to in return to get a share of the spoils, replied in praise of Beeka Mole as a model of all the virtues. In this way the merchant's fears were stilled, and with a comparatively light heart he traveled on to his village, and within a week or so returned to the city with half a dozen sturdy young nephews and friends, whom he had enlisted to help him carry home his precious box. At the great market-place in the center of the city, where the merchant left his friends, saying that he would go and get a box of jewels and rejoin them, to which they consented, and away he went. Arrived at the shop of Beeka Mole, and went up and saluted him. "Good day, Lala Ji," he said, but Lala pretended not to see him, so he repeated the salutation. "What do you want?" snapped Beeka Mole. "You said your good day twice. Why don't you tell me your business?" "Don't you remember me?" asked the merchant. "Remember you?" growled the other. "No, why should I? I have plenty to do to remember good customers without trying to remember every beggar who comes whining for charity." When he heard this, the merchant began to tremble. "Lala Ji!" he cried. "Surely you remember me and the little box I gave you to take care of, and you promised, yes, indeed, you promised very kindly that I might return to claim it, and—" "You scoundrel!" roared Beeka Mole. "Get out of my shop. Be off with you, you impudent scamp. Everyone knows that I never keep treasures for anyone. I have enough trouble to try to keep on my own. Come off with you." With that he began to push the merchant out of his shop, and when the poor man resisted, two of the bystanders came to Beeka Mole's aid and flung the merchant out into the road, like a bale of goods dropped from a camel. Slowly he picked himself up out of the dust, bruised and battered and bleeding, but feeling nothing but the pain in his body, nothing but a dreadful numbing sensation that, after all, he was ruined and lost. Slowly he dragged himself a little further from where the fat and furious Beeka Mole stood amongst his disordered silks and carpets, and coming to a friendly wall he crouched and leant against it, and putting his head into his hands gave himself up to the agony of misery and despair. There he sat motionless, like one turned to stone, while darkness fell around him, and when, about 11 o'clock that night, a certain gay young fellow named Cushy Ram passed by him with a friend, he saw the merchant sitting hunched against the corner, and remarked, "A thief, no doubt." "You're wrong," replied the other. "Thieves don't sit in full view of people like that, even at night." And so the two passed on, and thought no more of him. About 5 o'clock next morning, Cushy Ram was returning home again, when, to his astonishment, he saw the miserable merchant still sitting as he had seen him a few hours before. Surely something must be the matter with the man who would sit all night in the open street, and Cushy Ram resolved to see what it was. So he went up and shook the merchant gently on the shoulder. "Who are you?" he asked, "and what are you doing here? Are you ill?" "Ill," said the merchant in a hollow voice. "Yes, ill with a sickness for which there is no medicine." "Oh, nonsense!" cried Cushy Ram. "Come along with me. I know the medicine that will cure you, I think." And the young man seized the merchant by the arm, and hoisting him to his feet, and dragged him to his own lodging, where he first gave all a large glass of wine, and then, after he had refreshed him with food, bade him to tell his adventures. Meanwhile, the merchant's companions in the marketplace, being dull-witted persons, thought that he did not return. He must have gone himself home. And as soon as they were tired of waiting, they went back to their village and left him to look after his own affairs. He would therefore have fared badly had it not been for his rescuer, Cushy Ram, who, while still a boy, had been left a great deal of money with no one to advise him how to spend it. He was a high-spirited, kind-hearted, and shrewd into the bargain, but he threw his money away like water, and generally upon the nearest thing or person in his way, and that, alas, most often was himself. Now, however, he had taken it into his head to befriend this miserable merchant, and he meant to do it. And on his side the merchant felt confidence revive, and without further ado told all that had happened. Cushy Ram laughed heartily at the idea of any stranger entrusting his wealth to Beeka Mo. "Why, he is the greatest rascal in the city," he cried. "Unless you believe what some of them say of me, well, there's nothing to be done for the present. But just stay here quietly, and I think that at the end of a short time I shall find which medicine will heal your sickness." And at this the merchant again took courage, and a little ease crept into his heart as he gratefully accepted his new friend's invitation. A few days later, Cushy Ram sent for some friends to see him, and talked with them long, and although the merchant did not hear the conversation, he did hear shouts of laughter, as though at some good joke. But the laughter echoed dully in his own heart, for the more he considered, the more he despaired of ever recovering his fortune from the grasp of Beeka Mo. One day, soon after this, Cushy Ram came to him and said, "You remember the wall where I found you that night, near Beeka Mo's shop?" "Yes, indeed I do," answered the merchant. "Well," continued Cushy Ram, "this afternoon you must go and stand at the same spot and watch, and when someone gives you a signal, you must go to Beeka Mo and salute him and say, 'Oh, Lala Ji, will you kindly let me have back the box of mine which I have on trust?'" "Oh, what's the use of that?" asked the merchant. "He won't do it any more now than he would have when I asked him before." "Never mind," replied Cushy Ram. "Do exactly what I tell you, and repeat exactly what I say, word for word, and I will answer for the rest." So, that afternoon, the merchant at a certain time went and stood by the wall as he was told. He noticed that Beeka Mo saw him, but neither took any heed of the other. Presently up the bazaar came a gorgeous palanquin like those which ladies of rank are carried about. It was borne by 4 bearers, well dressed in rich liveries, and its curtains and trappings were truly magnificent. In attendance was a grave-looking personage, whom the merchant recognized as one of the friends who visited Cushy Ram. Behind him came a servant with a box covered with a cloth upon his head. The palanquin was borne along at a smart pace, and was set down at Beeka Mo's shop. The fat shopkeeper was on his feet at once, and bowed deeply as the gentleman in attendance advanced. "May I inquire," he said, "who is in this palanquin that designs to favor my humble shop with a visit, and what may I do for her?" The gentleman, after whispering at the curtain of the palanquin, explained that this was a relative of his who was traveling, but her husband could go no further with her, and she desired to leave Beeka Mo a box of jewels for safe custody. Lala bowed again to the ground. "It is not," he said, "quite in his way of business, of course, but if he could please the lady, he would most be happy, and would guard the box with his life." When the servant carrying the box was called up, the box was unlocked, and a mass of jewelry laid open to the gaze that enraptured the Lala, whose mouth watered as he turned over the rich gems. All of this the merchant had watched from a distance, and now he saw. Could he be mistaken? No, he distinctly saw a hand beckoning through the curtain on that side of the palanquin away from the shop. The signal! Was that the signal? He thought. And the hand beckoned again, impatiently it seemed to him. And so forward he went, very quietly, and saluting Beeka Mo, who was sitting turning over the contents of the amazing box of jewels which Fortune and some fools were putting into his care. Oh, Lala G, will you kindly let me have back the box of mine which you have on trust? Now Lala looked up as though he had been stung, but quickly the thought flashed through his mind that if the man began making a fuss again, he would lose the confidence of these new and richer customers. So he controlled himself. Dear me, of course, yes, I'd forgotten all about it. And he went off and brought the little box and put it in the merchant's trembling hands. Quickly the latter pulled out a key which hung by a string around his neck and opened the box. And when he saw that his treasures were all there, he rushed into the road and, with the box under his arm, began dancing like a madman with great shouts and screams of laughter. Just then a messenger came running up, and saluting the gentleman attending the palanquin, he said, My lady's husband has returned and is preparing to travel with her, so there's no necessity to deposit the jewels. Whereat the gentleman quickly closed and relocked the box, and handed it back to the waiting servant. Then from the palanquin came a yell of laughter, and out jumped, not a lady, but Cushy Ram, who immediately ran after and joined the merchant in the middle of the road and danced as madly as he. Beacamo stood and stared stupidly at them. Then, with a shrill cackle of laughter, he flung off his turban and bounced out of the road with the other two, and fell to dancing and snapping his fingers until he was out of breath. Lala G, said the gentleman who had played the part of the relative attendant on the palanquin. Why do you dance? The merchant dances because he has recovered his fortune. Cushy Ram dances because he is a madman and has tricked you. But why do you dance? I dance, panted Beaker Ram. Typo. Beaker Mole, glaring at him with a bloodshot eye. I danced because I knew 13 different ways of deceiving people by pretending confidence in them. I didn't know there were any more, and now there's a 14th, and that is why I dance. Okay, so the con man is excited about learning about a new con. That's interesting. Okay, we've got 6 minutes before the regularly scheduled ads. So I may go ahead and push the ads early so we can get back to stories. So I will see you all in a bit. Okay, welcome back. My timer says the ads are over, so I'm going to assume they're over. There are 2 cats on camera. Looks like I need to adjust it to tilt down a little bit more. Now I've got a 3rd cat at my feet, so at least my feet will be warm. Let's see, we've had a Thumbelina rewrite and dealing with thieves. That's interesting. Okay, now we have a Danish tale. It is apparently just a section of it. Should be interesting nonetheless. For our next story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales, The Green Knight. There lived once a king and queen who had an only daughter, a charming and beautiful girl, dearer to them than anything else in the world. When the princess was 12 years old, the queen fell sick, and nothing that could be done for her was of any use. All the doctors in the kingdom did their best to cure her, but in spite of their efforts, she grew worse and worse. As she was about to die, she sent for the king and said to him, "Promise me that whatever our daughter asks you will do, no matter whether you wish to or not." The king at first hesitated, but as she added, "Unless you promise this, I cannot die in peace." And at length he did what she desired and gave the promise, after which she became quite happy and died. It happened that near the king's palace lived a noble lady whose little girl was about the same age as the princess, and the 2 children were always together. After the queen's death, the princess begged that this lady should come to live with her at the palace. The king was not quite pleased with the arrangement, for he distrusted the lady, but the princess wished so much for it that he did not like to refuse. "I am lonely, father," she said, "and the beautiful presents you give me cannot make up for me the loss of my mother. If this lady comes to live here, I shall almost feel as if the queen had come back to me." So a magnificent suite of rooms was prepared and set aside for the newcomers, and the little princess was wild with joy at the thought of having her friends so near. The lady and her daughter arrived, and for a long time all went well. They were very kind to the motherless princess, and she almost began to forget how dull she had been before they came. Then one day, as she and the other girl were playing together in the gardens, the lady came to them, dressed for a journey, and kissed the princess tenderly, saying, "Farewell, my child. My daughter and I must leave you and go far away." The poor princess began to cry bitterly. "Oh, you must not leave me," she sobbed. "What shall I do without you? Please, oh, please stay." The lady shook her head. "It almost breaks my heart to go, dear child," she said, "but alas, it must be." "Is there anything that can keep you here?" asked the princess. "Only one thing," answered the lady, "and that is impossible. We will not speak of it." "Nothing is impossible," persisted the princess. "Tell me what it is, and it shall be done." So at last her friend told her. "If the king, your father, would make me his queen, I would stay," she said. "But that he would never do." "Oh, yes, that is easy enough," cried the princess, delighted to think that, after all, they need not be parted. And she ran off to find her father and beg him to marry the lady at once. He had done everything she asked, and she was quite certain he would do this. "But what is it, my daughter?" he asked when he saw her. You've been crying. Are you not happy? Father, said she, I have come to ask you to marry the Countess, for that was the lady's real title. If you do not, she will leave us, and then I shall be as lonely as before. You have never refused me what I have asked before. Do not refuse me now. The king turned quite pale when he heard this. He did not like the Countess, and so, of course, he did not wish to marry her. Besides, he still loved his dead wife. No, that I cannot do, my child, he said at last. At these words, the princess began to cry once more, and the tears ran down her cheeks so fast, and she sobbed so bitterly, that her father felt quite miserable too. He remembered the promise he had given always to do what his daughter asked him, and in the end he gave way, and promised to marry the Countess. The princess at once was all smiles and ran away to tell the good news. Soon after, the wedding was celebrated with great festivities, and the Countess became queen. But in spite of all the joy and merriment that filled the palace, the king looked pale and sad, for he was certain that ill would come of the marriage. Sure enough, in a very short time, the queen's manner towards the princess began to change. She was jealous of her because she, instead of her own daughter, was heir to the throne, and very soon she could no longer hide her thoughts. Instead of speaking kindly and lovingly as before, her words became rough and cruel, and once or twice she even slapped the princess's face. The king was very unhappy at seeing his dearly loved daughter suffer, and at last she became so wretched that he could no longer bear it, calling her to him, and one day he said, "My daughter, you no longer marry as you should be, and I fear that is the fault of your stepmother. It would be better for you to live with her no longer. Therefore, I built you a castle on the island in the lake, and that is to be your home in future. There you can do just as you like, and your stepmother will never enter it." Sounds like a good idea to me. The princess was delighted to hear this, and still more pleased when she saw the castle, which was full of beautiful things, and had a great number of windows looking out on the lovely blue water. There was a boat in which she might row herself, and a garden where she could walk wherever she wished without fear of meeting the unkind queen, and the king promised to visit her every day. For a long time she dwelt in peace, and grew more and more beautiful every day. Everyone who saw her said, "The princess is the loveliest lady in the land," and this was told to the queen, who hated her stepdaughter still more because her daughter was ugly and stupid. One day it was announced that a great meeting of knights and nobles was to be held in a journeying kingdom distant from 2 days' journey. There were to be all kinds of festivities, and a tournament was to be fought, and a banquet held in honor of the coming of age of the prince of the country. The princess's father was among those invited, but before he set out he went over the lake to leave his daughter. Although she had such a beautiful home, and was no longer scolded by the queen, the poor princess was dreadfully lonely, and she told her father that it would be better if she was dead. He did his best to comfort her, and promised that he would return soon, and was there anything he could do to help her? "Yes," she said, "you may greet the Green Knight from me." Now, the king wondered a little at these words, for he had never heard of the Green Knight, but there was no time to ask questions, therefore he gave the promise and rode off on his journey. When he came to the palace where the festivities were to take place, the first thing he did was ask, "Can anyone tell me where I may find the Green Knight?" No, they were very sorry, but none had ever heard of such a person either. Certainly he was not to be found there. At this the king grew troubled, and even the banquet and the tournament could not make him feel happier. He inquired of everyone he saw, "Do you know the Green Knight?" But the only answer he got was, "No, your majesty, we have never heard of him." At length he began to believe the princess was mistaken, and that there was no such person. He started on his homeward journey sorrowfully enough, for this was the first time for many months that the princess had asked him to do anything for her that he could not do. He thought so much about it that he did not notice the direction his horse was taking, and presently he found himself in the midst of a dense forest where he had never been before. He rode on and on, looking for a path, but as the sun began to set, he realized he was lost. At last, to his delight, he saw a man driving some pigs, riding up to him and said, "I've lost my way. Can you tell me where I am?"
"We are in the Green Knight's forest," answered the man, "and these are his pigs."
At that, the king's heart grew light. "Where does the Green Knight live?" he asked.
"It's a very long way from here," said the swineherd, "but I will show you the path."
So he went a little further with the king and put him on the right road, and the king bade him farewell. Presently he came to a second forest, and there he met another swineherd driving pigs. "Whose beasts are those, my man?" he asked. "Those are the Green Knight's," said the man. "And where does he live?" inquired the king. "Oh, not far from here." Then the king rode on, and about midday he reached a beautiful castle standing in the midst of the loveliest garden you possibly imagine, where fountains played in marble basins, and peacocks walked on smooth lawns. On the edge of a marble basin sat a young and handsome man, who was dressed from head to foot in a suit of green armor, who was feeding the goldfish which swam in the clear water. "This must be the Green Knight," thought the king, and going up to the young man, he said courteously, "I've come, sir, to give you my daughter's greeting, but I have wandered far and lost my way in your forest." The knight looked at him for a moment, as though puzzled. "I have never met either you or your daughter," he said at last, "but you are very welcome all the same." And he waved his hand towards the castle. However, the king took no notice and told him that his daughter had sent the message to the Green Knight, and as he was the only Green Knight in the kingdom, this message must be for him. "You must pass the night with me here," said the knight. And as the sun was already set, the king was thankful to accept the invitation. They sat down in the castle hall to a magnificent banquet, and although he had traveled much and visited many monarchs in their palaces, the king had never fared better than at the table of the Green Knight, whilst his host himself was so clever and agreeable that he was delighted and thought, what a charming son-in-law this knight would make. Next morning, when he was about to set forth on his journey home, the Green Knight put into his hand a jeweled casket, saying, "Will your highness graciously condescend to carry this gift to the princess, your daughter? It contains my portrait, that when I come she may know me, for I feel certain that she is the lady I have seen night after night in a dream, and I must win her for my bride. I must win her for my bride." The king gave the knight his blessing, and promised to take the gift to his daughter. With that he set off, and ere long reached his own country. The princess was awaiting him anxiously when he arrived, and ran in his arms in joy of seeing her dear father again. "Did you see the Green Knight?" she asked. "Yes," answered the king, drawing out the casket the knight had sent, "and he begged me to give this to you, so that you might know him when he arrives, and not mistake him for somebody else." When the princess saw the portrait, she was delighted, and exclaimed, "It is indeed the man I have seen in my dreams. Now I shall be happy, for he and no other shall be my husband." Very soon the Green Knight arrived, and he looked so handsome in his green armor, with a long green plume from his helmet, that the princess fell still more in love with him than before, and when he saw her, he recognized her as a lady whom he had often dreamt of, and immediately asked her to be his bride. The princess looked down and smiled as she answered him. "We must keep this secret from my stepmother until the wedding day," she said, "for otherwise she will find a way to do some evil." "As you please," replied the prince, "but I must visit you daily, for I can no longer live without you. I will come early in the morning and not take leave until dark, thus the queen will not see me row across the lake." For a long time the Green Knight visited the princess every day, and spent many hours wandering with her through the beautiful gardens, where they knew the queen could not see them. But secrets, as you know, are dangerous things. And at last, one morning, a girl who was in service of the palace happened to be walking by the lake early in the morning, and beheld a wonderfully handsome young man in a beautiful suit of green satin come down to the edge of the lake. Not guessing that he was watched, he got into a little boat that lay moored at the bank and rowed himself over to the island where the princess's castle stood. The girl went home wondering who the knight could be, and as she was brushing the queen's hair, she said to her,
"Does your majesty know the princess has a suitor?"
"Nonsense," replied the queen crossly, but she was dreadfully vexed at the mere idea, as her own daughter was still unmarried, and was likely to remain so because she was so ill-tempered and stupid that no one wanted her.
"It is true," persisted the girl. "He's dressed all in green and is very handsome. I saw him myself, though he did not see me. He got into a boat and rowed over to the island, and the princess was waiting for him at the castle door."
"I must find out what this means," thought the queen, but she bade her maid of honor to cease chattering and mind her own business. Early next morning the queen got up and went down to the shore of the lake, where she hid herself behind a tree. Sure enough, there came a handsome knight dressed in green, just as the maid of honor had said, and he got into a boat and rowed over to the island where the princess awaited him. The angry queen remained by the lake all day, but it was not until evening that the knight returned, and leaping on shore, he tied the boat to its moorings and went away through the forest.
"I have cut my stepdaughter nicely," thought the queen, "but she shall not be married before my own sweet girl. I will find a way to put a stop to this."
Accordingly, she took a poisoned nail and stuck it in the handle of the oar in such a way that the knight would be sure to catch his hand when he picked up the oar. Then she went home laughing, very much pleased with her creations. The next day the Green Knight went to visit the princess as usual, but directly he took up the oars to row over to the island, he felt a sharp scratch on his hand. "Oof," he said, dropping the oar from pain. "What have I scratched so?" But look as he might, only a tiny mark was to be seen. "Well, that's strange how a nail could have come here since yesterday," he thought. "Still, it is not very serious, though it hurts a good deal." And indeed, it seemed such a little thing that he did not mention it to the princess. However, when he reached home that evening, he felt so ill he was obliged to go to bed, with no one to tend him except his old nurse. But of this, of course, the princess knew nothing, and the poor girl, fearing lest some evil should have befallen him, or some other maiden more beautiful than she would have stolen his heart from her, grew almost sick with waiting. Lonely indeed she was, for her father, who would have helped her, was traveling in a foreign country, and she did not know how to obtain news of her lover. In this matter time passed away, and one day, as she sat by the open window crying and feeling very sad, a little bird came and perched on the branch of a tree that stood just underneath. It began to sing, and so beautifully that the princess was obliged to stop crying and to listen to it, and very soon she found out that the bird was trying to attract her attention.
"Twit, twit, your lover is sick,"
it sang. "Alas," cried the princess, "what can I do?"
"Twit, twit, you must go to your father's palace."
"And what shall I do there?" she asked.
"Twit, there you will find a snake with 9 young ones."
"Ugh," answered the princess with a shiver, for she did not like snakes, but the little bird paid no heed.
"Put them in a basket and go to the Green Knight's palace," said she.
"And what am I to do with them when I get there?" she cried, blushing all over, for there was no one to see her but the bird.
"Dress yourself as a kitchen maid and ask for a place to eat. Then you must take soup out of the snakes and give it 3 times to the knight, and he will be cured to eat."
"But what has made him ill?" asked the princess. The bird, however, had flown away, and there was nothing for it but to go to her father's palace and look for the snakes. When she came there, she found the mother snake with the 9 little snakes all curled up so that you could hardly tell their heads from their tails. The princess did not like having to touch them, but when the old snake had wriggled out of the nest to bask in the sun a little, she picked up the young ones and put them in a basket as the bird had told her, and ran off to find the Green Knight's castle. All day she walked along, stopping and picking up some wild berries and other gathering nosegay, Although she rested now and then, she would not lie down to sleep before she reached the castle. At last she came in sight of it, and just then she met a girl driving a flock of geese.
"Good day," said the princess. "Can you tell me if this is the castle of the Green Knight?" "Yes, that is it," answered the goose girl, "for I am driving his geese. But the Green Knight is very ill, and they say that unless he can be cured within 3 days, he will surely die."
At this news, the princess grew as white as death. The ground seemed to spin around, and she closed her hand tight on a bush that was standing beside her. By and by, with great effort, she recovered herself, and said to the goose girl,
"Would you like to have a fine silk dress to wear?"
The goose girl's eyes glistened.
"Yes, that I would," answered she. "Then take off your dress and give it to me, and I will give you mine," said the princess.
The girl could scarcely believe her ears, but the princess was already unfastening her beautiful silk dress and taking off her silk stockings and pretty red shoes, and the goose girl lost no time in slipping out of her rough linen shirt and tunic. Then the princess put on the other's rags and let her hair down, and went to the kitchen to ask for a place.
"Do you want a kitchen maid?" said she.
"Yes, we do," answered the cook, who was too busy to ask the newcomer many questions. The following day, after a good night's rest, the princess set about her new duties. The other servants were speaking of their master and saying to each other how ill he was, and that because he could not be cured within 3 days, he would surely die. The princess thought of the snakes and the bird's advice, and lifting her head from the pots and pans she was scouring, she said,
"I know how to make a soup that has such wonderful power that whoever tastes it is sure to be cured, whatever his illness may be. As the doctors cannot cure your master, shall I try?"
At first, they laughed at her.
"What, a scullion-cured knight with the best physicians in the kingdom have failed?"
But at last, just because all the physicians had failed, they decided that it would do no harm for her to try. Then she ran off joyfully to fetch her basket of snakes and make them into broth. When this was ready, she carried some to the knight's room and entered it boldly, pushing aside all the learned doctors who stood beside the bed. The poor knight was too ill to know her. Besides, she was so ragged and dirty that he would have not been likely to do so if he had been well. But when he had tasted the soups, he was so much better that he was able to sit up. The next day he had some more, and then he was able to dress himself.
"That is certainly a wonderful soup," said the cook.
The third day after he had eaten the soup, the knight was well again. "Who are you?" asked the girl. "Who has made the soup that has cured me?"
"Yes,"
answered the princess. "Choose, then, whatever you wish as a reward," said the knight, "and you shall have it."
"I would be your bride,"
asked the princess. The knight frowned in surprise at such boldness, and shook his head. "That is one thing I cannot grant," he said, "for I am pledged to marry the most beautiful princess in the world. So please choose again." Then the princess ran away and washed herself and mended her rags, and when she returned, the Green Knight recognized her at once. You can think of what a joyful meeting that was. Soon after, they were married with great splendor. All of the knights and princes in the kingdom were summoned to the wedding, and the princess wore a dress that shone like the sun, so that no one had ever beheld a more gorgeous sight. The princess's father, of course, was present, but the wicked queen and her daughter were driven out of the country, and as nobody had seen them since, were very likely eaten by the wild beasts of the forest. But the bride and bridegroom were so happy that they forgot all about them, and they lived with the old king till he died, and they succeeded him. Okay, well, how long is this next story? Because we've got a little over half an hour. This one is 7 pages, the one after it is 6. Let's see how far we can go. And there's a seismitoad in chat. So our next story for this fabulous Friday Night of Fairy Tales. The 5 Wise Words of the Guru. Once there lived a handsome man named Ram Sain, who, though the favorite with everyone, was unhappy because he was scolded of his stepmother. All day long she went on talking until the youth was driven so distracted that he determined to go away somewhere and seek his fortune. No sooner had he decided to leave his home than he made his plans, and very next morning he started off with a few clothes in a wallet and a little money in his pocket. But there was one person in the village to whom he wished to say goodbye, and that was the wise old guru, or teacher, who had taught him so much. So he turned to face first, and rode towards his master's hut, and before the sun was well up, was knocking at the door. The old man perceived his pupil affectionately, but he was wise in reading faces, and saw at once that the youth was in trouble. "My son," he said, "what is the matter?" "Nothing, father," replied the young man, "but I have determined to go into the world to seek my fortune." "Be advised," returned the Guru, "and remain in your father's house. It is better to have half a loaf at home than to seek a whole one in distant countries." But Ram Sain was in no mood to heed such advice, and very soon the old man ceased to press him. "Well," he said at last, "if your mind is made up, I suppose you must have your way. But listen carefully, and remember 5 parting counsels which I will give you, and if you keep those, no evil shall befall you. First, always obey without questions the orders of him whose service you enter. Second, never speak harshly or unkindly to anyone. Third, never lie. Fourth, never try to appear the equal of those above you in station. And 5, wherever you go, you will meet those who read or teach from the holy books. Stay and listen, if but for a few minutes, that you may be strengthened in the path of duty." Then Ram Sain started upon his journey, promising to bear the old man's words in mind. After some days he came to a great city. He had spent all the money which he had at his starting, and therefore resolved to look for work, however humble it might be. Catching sight of a prosperous-looking merchant standing in front of a shop full of grain of all kinds, Ram Sain went up to him and asked him whether he could give him anything to do. The merchant gazed at him for so long that the young man began to lose heart, but at length he answered, "Yes, of course, there is a place waiting for you." "What do you mean?" asked Ram Sain. "Why," replied the other, "yesterday our Rajah's chief vizier dismissed his body servant and is wanting another. Now you are just the sort of person that he needs, for you are young and tall and handsome. I advise you to apply there." Thanking the merchant for his advice, the young man set out at once for the vizier's house, and soon managed, thanks to his good looks and appearance, to be engaged as a great man's servant. One day, soon after this, the Rajah of the palace started on a journey, and the chief vizier accompanied him. With them was an army of servants and attendants, soldiers, muleteers, camel drivers, merchants with grain and stores for man and beast, singers to make entertainment by the way, and musicians to accompany them, besides elephants, camels, horses, mules, ponies, donkeys, goats, and carts, and wagons of every kind and description, so that it seemed that more a large town on the march than anything else. Thus they traveled for several days, till they entered a country that was like a sea of sand, where the swifting dust floated in clouds, and men and beasts were half choked by it. Towards the close of the day they came to a village, and when the headsmen hurried out to salute the Rajah and pay him their respects, they began, with very long serious faces, to explain that, whilst they and all they had were, of course, at the disposal of the Rajah, the coming of so large a company had nevertheless put them into a dreadful difficulty, because they had never a well or spring of water in their country, and they had no water to give drink to such an army of men and beasts. Great fear fell upon the host at the words of the headsman, but the Rajah merely told the vizier that he must get water somehow, and that settled the matter so far as he was concerned. The wazir went off in haste to the oldest men in the place and began to question them as to whether there were no wells nearby. They all looked helplessly at each other and said nothing, but at length one old graybeard replied, "Truly, sir, there is, within a mile or two of this village, a well which some former king made hundreds of years ago. It is, they say, great and inexhaustible, covered by heavy stonework, and with a flight of steps leading down to the water in the very bowels of the earth. But no man ever goes near it because it is haunted by evil spirits, and it is known that whoever so disappears down the well shall never be seen again." The vizier stroked his beard and considered a moment. Then he turned to Ramsine, who stood behind his chair. "There is a proverb," he said, "that no man can be trusted until he has been tried. Go you and get the Rajah and his people water from this well." Then there flashed into Ramsine's mind the first counsel of the old guru. "Always obey without question the orders of him whose service you enter." So he replied at once that he was ready, and left to prepare for his adventure. 2 great brazen vessels were fastened to a mule, 2 lesser ones were bound upon his shoulders, and thus provided he set out, with the old villager as his guide. In a short time they came to a spot where some big trees towered over the barren country, whilst under their shadow lay a dome of an ancient building. This the guide pointed out as the well, but excused himself from going further, as he was an old man and tired, and it was already near sunset that he must be returning home. No, he was just afraid of ghosts. So Ramsine bid him farewell and went on alone with his mule. Arrived at the trees, Ramsine tied up his beast and lifted the vessels from his shoulders, and having found the opening to the well, descended by a flight of steps which led down into the darkness. The steps were broad white slabs of alabaster, which gleamed in the shadows as he went lower and lower. All was very silent. Even the sound of his bare feet upon the pavement seemed to wake and echo in that lonely place. And when one of the vessels he carried happened to slip and fell upon the steps, it clanged so loudly that he jumped at the noise. Still, he went on, until at last he reached the wide pool of sweet water, and there he washed his jars with care before he filled them, and began to remount the steps with the lighter vessels, since the big ones were so heavy that he could only take up one at a time. Suddenly something moved above him, and looking up he saw a great giant standing in the doorway. In one hand he held clasped his heart of a dreadful-looking mass of bones. In the other was a lamp which cast long shadows about the walls, and made him seem even more terrible than he already was. "What think you, O mortal," said the giant, "of my fair and lovely wife?" And he held the light towards the bones in his arms, and looked lovingly at them. Now, I must tell you that this poor giant had a very beautiful wife, whom he had loved dearly. But when she had died, her husband refused to believe in her death, and always carried her around for as long as she had become nothing but bones. Ramsine, of course, did not know this, but there came to his mind a second wise saying of the Guru, which forbade him to speak harshly or inconsiderately of others. So he replied, "Truly, sir, I am sure you could find nowhere such another."
"Ah, what eyes you have!" cried the delighted giant. "At least you can see. I do not know how often I have slain those who insulted her by saying she is but dried bones. You are a fine young man, and I will help you."
So saying, he laid down the bones with great tenderness, and snatching up the huge brass vessels, carried them up again, and replaced them with such ease that it was done by all the time when Ramsine had reached the open air with the smaller ones.
"Now," said the giant, "you have pleased me, and you may ask me for one favor, and whatever you wish I will do it for you. Perhaps you would like me to show you where lies the buried treasure of dead kings?" he asked eagerly.
But Ramsine shook his head at the mention of buried wealth. "The favor that I would ask," he said, "is that you will leave off haunting this well, that men may go in and obtain water." Perhaps the giant expected some favor more difficult to grant, for his face brightened, and he promised to depart at once. and as Ram's sign went off through the gathering darkness with his precious burden of water, he beheld the giant striding away with the bones of his dead wife in his arms. Great was wonder and rejoicing at the camp when Ram's sign returned with the water. He never said anything, however, about his adventure with the giant, and merely told the Rajah that there was nothing to prevent the well from being used, and used it was, and nobody ever saw any more of the giant. The Rajah was so pleased with the bearing of Ram's sign that he ordered the vizier to give the young man to him in exchange for one of his own servants. So Ram's sign became the Rajah's attendant, and so the days went by that the king became more and more delighted with the youth, because, mindful of the Guru's third counsel, he was always honest and spoke the truth. He grew in favor rapidly until at last the Rajah made him his treasurer, and thus he reached a high place in the court and had wealth and power in his hands. Unluckily, the Rajah had a brother who was very a bad man, and his brother thought that if he could win the young treasurer over to himself, he might by this means manage to steal, little by little, the king's treasure when he needed it. Then, with plenty of money, he could bribe the soldiers and some of the Rajah's counselors, head a rebellion, dethrone and kill his brother, and reign himself instead. He was too weary, of course, to tell Ram's sign of all the wicked plans, but he began flattering him whenever he saw him, and at last he offered him his daughter in marriage. Ram's sign remembered the fourth counsel of the old Guru: never tried to appear the equal of those above him in station. Therefore, he respectfully declined the great honor of marrying a princess. Of course, the prince, baffled by this very beginning of his enterprise, was furious and determined to work Ram's sign's ruin, and entering the Rajah's presence, he told him a story of Ram's sign having spoken insulting words of his sovereign and of his daughter. What it was, all nobody knew, but it was not true, and the wicked prince did not know either. But the Rajah grew very angry and red in the face as he listened, and declared that until the treasurer's head was cut off, neither he nor the princess nor his brother would eat or drink.
But, he added, I do not wish anyone to know that this was done by my desire, and anyone who mentions the subject will be severely punished.
And with this the prince was forced to be content. Then the Rajah sent for an officer of his guard, and told him to take some soldiers and ride at once to a tower which was satisfied just outside the town, and if anyone should come to inquire when the building was going to be finished, or should ask any other questions about it, the officer should chop his head off and bring it to him. As for the body, that could be buried on the spot. The old officer thought these instructions were rather odd, but it was no business of his, so he saluted and went off to do his master's bidding. Early in the morning the Rajah, who had not slept at all that night, sent for Ram's sign, and bade him to go to the new hunting tower, and ask the people there how it was getting on, and when it was going to be finished, and not to hurry back with the answer. Away went Ram's sign upon his errand, but on the road, as he was passing a little temple on the outskirts of the city, he heard someone inside reading aloud. And remembering the Guru's fifth counsel, he just stepped inside and sat down to listen for a minute. He did not mean to stay longer, but he became so deeply interested in the wisdom of the teacher that he sat and sat and sat while the sun rose higher and higher. In the meantime, the wicked prince, who dared not disobey the Rajah's command, was feeling very hungry, and as for the princess, she was quietly crying in the corner, waiting for some news of Ram's death, so that she might eat her breakfast. Hours passed, and stare as he might from the window, no messenger could be seen. At last the prince could bear it no longer, and hastily disguised himself so that no one would recognize him, and jumped on a horse and galloped over to the hunting tower, where the Rajah had told him that the execution was to take place. But when he got there, there was no execution going on. There were only some men engaging in building, and a number of soldiers idly watching them. He forgot that he had disguised himself, and that no one would know him. So riding up, he cried out, "Now then, you men, why are you idling about here instead of finishing what you did came? When was it to be done?" At his words, the soldiers looked at the commanding officer, who was standing a little apart from the rest. Unperceived by the prince, he made a slight sign. A sword flashed in the sun, and off flew the head to the ground beneath. As part of the prince's disguise, he had been thick beard, so the men did not recognize the dead head as Raja's brother. But they wrapped his head in a cloth and buried the body as their commander had bade them. When this was ended, the officer took the cloth and rode off to the direction of the palace. Meanwhile, the Rajah came home from his council, and to his great surprise found neither head nor brother waiting him. As time passed on, he became uneasy, and thought that he had better go himself to see what the matter was. So ordering his horse, he rode off alone. It happened that just as the Rajah came near the temple where Ramsan still sat, the young treasurer, hearing the sound of a horse's hooves, looked over his shoulder and saw that the rider was the Rajah himself. Feeling much ashamed of himself for having forgotten his errand, he jumped up and hurried out to meet his master, who reined up his horse and seemed very surprised, as indeed he was, to see him. At the moment there arrived the officer of the guard carrying his parcel. He saluted the Rajah gravely, and dismounting, laid the bundle on the road and began to undo the wrappings, whilst the Rajah watched him with wonder and interest. When the last string was undone, and the head of his brother was displayed unto his view, the Rajah sprang from his horse and caught the soldier by the arm. As soon as he could speak, he questioned the man as to what had occurred, and little by little a dark suspicion darted through him. Then, briefly telling the soldier that he had done well, the Rajah drew Ramsan to the side, and in a few minutes learned from him now, in attending the Guru's council, he had delayed to do the king's message. In the end, the Rajah found from some papers the proofs of his dead brother's treachery, and Ramsan established his innocence and integrity. He continued to serve the Rajah for many years with unanswering fidelity. He married a maiden of his own rank in life, with whom he lived happily, dying at last honored and loved by all men. Sons were born to him, and in time, to them he also taught the 5 wise sayings of the old Guru. Okay, well, got 17 minutes left. The next one is slightly shorter than this one, so maybe I can get through it. So, our final tale for this fabulous Friday night. The Golden-Headed Fish. Once upon a time there lived in Egypt a king who lost his sight from bad illness. Of course, he was very unhappy, and became more so as months passed, and all the best doctors in the land were unable to cure him. The poor man grew very thin from misery that everyone thought he was going to die, and the prince, his only son, thought so too. Great was therefore the rejoicing through Egypt when a traveler arrived in a boat down the river Nile, and after questioning the people as to the reason of their downcast looks, declared that he was the court physician of a king from a far country, and would, if allowed, examine the eyes of the blind man. He was at once admitted into the royal presence, and after a few minutes of careful study, announced that the case, though very serious, was not quite hopeless. "Somewhere in the great sea," he said, "there exists a golden-headed fish. If you can manage to catch this creature, bring it to me, and I will prepare an ointment from its blood which will restore your sight. For 100 days I will wait here, but if at the end of that time the fish should not be uncaught, I must return to my own master." The next morning the young prince set forth in the quest for the fish, taking with him 100 men, each carrying a net. Quite a little fleet of boats was awaiting them, and in these they sailed to the middle of the great sea. During 3 months they labored diligently from sunrise to sunset, but though they caught large multitudes of fish, not one of them had a golden head. "It is quite useless now," said the prince on the very last night. "Even if we find it this evening, the 100 days will be over in an hour, and long before we can reach Egypt's capital, the doctor will be on his way home. Still, I will go out again and cast the net once more for myself." And so he did, and at the very moment that the 100 days were up, he drew in the net, and the golden-headed fish entangled into its meshes. "Success has come, but, as happens often, it is too late," murmured the young man, who had studied in the schools of philosophy.
But all the same, put the fish in the vessel full of water, and we will take it back to show my father that we have done what we could." But when he drew the fish, it looked up at him with such piteous eyes that he could not make up his mind to condemn it to death. For he knew well that, though doctors of his own country were ignorant of the secrets of the ointment, they would do all in their power to extract something from the fish's blood. So he picked up the prize of such much labor and threw it back into the sea, then began his journey back to the palace. When at last he fetched it, he found the king in a high fever, caused by his disappointment, and he refused to believe the story told him by his son. "Your head shall pay for it! Your head shall pay for it!" cried he, and bade the courtiers instantly summon the executioner to the palace. But, of course, somebody ran at once to the queen and told her all the king's orders, and she put common clothes on the prince and filled his pockets with gold, and hurried him on board a ship which was sailing that night to a distant land. "Your father will repent some day, and he will be thankful that you are now alive," said she. "But one last counsel I will give you, and that is, take no man into your service who desires to be paid every month." The young prince thought this advice rather odd. If the servant had to be paid anyhow, he did not understand what difference it could be made whether it was by the year or by the month. However, he had many times proved that his mother was wiser than he, and so he promised obedience. After a voyage of several weeks, he arrived at the island in which his mother had spoken. It was full of hills and woods and flowers, and beautiful white houses stood everywhere in gardens. "What a charming spot to live in," thought the prince, and he lost no time in buying one of the prettiest of dwellings. The servants came pressing to offer their services, but as they declared that they all must have payment at the end of every month, the young man, who remembered his mother's words, declined to have anything to say to them. At length one morning an Arab appeared and begged that the prince would engage him. "And what wages do you ask?" inquired the prince, when he had questioned the newcomer and found him suitable. "I want no money," answered the Arab. "At the end of a year you can see what my services are worth to you, and you can pay me in any way you like." And the young man was pleased, and took the Arab for his servant. Now, although no one would have guessed it from the look of the side of the island where the prince had landed, the other part was a complete desert, owing to its ravages of a horrible monster which came up from the sea and devoured all the corn and cattle. The governor had sent bands of soldiers to lie in wait for the creature in order to kill it, but somehow no one ever happened to be awake at the moment its ravages were committed. And it was in vain that the sleepy soldiers were always punished severely. The same thing invariably occurred next time, and at last heralds were sent throughout the island to offer great reward to the man who could slay the monster. As soon as the Arab heard the news, he went straight to the governor's palace. "If my master can succeed in killing the monster, what reward will you give him?" he asked. "My daughter, and anything besides what he chooses," answered the governor, but the Arab shook his head. "Give him your daughter and keep your wealth," he said, "but henceforward let her share your grains, wherever they are." "It is well," replied the governor, and ordered a deed to be prepared, which was signed by both of them. That night the Arab stole down to the shore to watch, but before he set out he rubbed himself all over with some oil which made his skin smart so badly that there was no chance of his going to sleep, as the soldiers had done. Then he hid himself behind a large rock and waited. By and by a swell seemed to rise in the water, and a few moments later a hideous monster, part bird, part beast, and part serpent, stepped noiselessly on the rocks. It walked stealthily up to the fields, but the Arab was ready for it, and as it passed, plunged his dagger into the soft part behind his ear. The creature staggered and gave a loud cry, and then rolled over dead, with its feet in the sea. The Arab watched for a little while, in order to make sure that there was no life left in the enemy, but as the huge body remained quite still, he quitted his hiding place and cut off the ear of his foe. Then he carried it to his master, bidding him to show it to the governor, and declare that he himself, and no other, had killed the monster. "But it was you, not I, who slew him," objected the prince. "Never mind, do as I bid you. I have a reason for it," answered the Arab. And though the young man did not like taking credit for what he had never done, at length he gave in. The governor was so delighted at the news that he begged the prince to take his daughter to wife that very day,
but the prince refused, saying that it was all he desired was a ship in which he could carry him to see the world. Of course, this was granted to him at once, and when he and his faithful Arab embarked, they found, heaped up on the vessel, stores of diamonds and precious stones, which the grateful governor had secretly placed there. So they sailed, and sailed, and they sailed, and at length they reached the shores of a great kingdom. Leaving the prince on board, the Arab went into the town to find out what sort of place it was. After some hours he returned, saying that he heard that the king's daughter was the most beautiful princess in the world, and that the prince would do well to ask her hand. Nothing loth, the prince listened to the advice, and taking some of the finest necklaces in his hand, he mounted a splendid horse which the Arab had bought for him, and rode up to the palace, closely followed by his faithful attendant. The strange king happened to be in a good humor, and they were readily admitting into his presence. They were readily admitted to his presence. Laying down his offerings on the steps of the throne, he prayed the king to grant him his daughter for marriage. The monarch listened to him in silence, but answered, after a pause, "Young man, if you wish my daughter for your wife, if that is what you wish. But first I must tell you that she has already gone through the marriage ceremony with 190 young men. Not one of them lived for 12 hours after. So think, while there's yet still time." The prince did think, and was so frightened that he very nearly went back to his ship without another word. But just as he was about to withdraw his proposal, the Arab whispered, "Fear nothing, but take her." "Luck must change sometime," he said at last, "and who will not risk his head for the hand of such a beautiful princess?" "As you will," replied the king. "Then I will give orders that the marriage shall be celebrated tonight." And so it was done, and after the ceremony the bride and bridegroom retired to their own apartments to set by themselves, for such was the custom of the country. The moon shone bright, and the prince walked to a window to look out upon the river and upon the distant hills, when his gaze suddenly fell on a silken shroud laid neatly out on the couch, with his name embroidered in gold thread across the front, for this was also the pleasure of the king. Horrified at the spectacle, he turned his head away, and this time, yes, I'm live. His gaze suddenly fell on a silken shroud neatly laid out on a couch, with his name embroidered in gold thread across the front, for this also was the pleasure of the king. I'm drawing a blank. Yeah. Horrified at the spectacle, he turned his head away, and this time his glance rested upon a group of men, busily digging beneath a window. It was a strange hour for anyone to be at work, and what was the hole for? It was a curious shape, so long and narrow. Yeah. It was so long and narrow, almost like... yes, that's what it was. It was his grave that they were digging. The shock of the discovery rendered him speechless, yet he stood fascinated and unable to move. At this moment, a small black snake darted from the mouth of the princess, who was seated at the table, and wriggled quickly towards him. The Arab was watching for something of that sort to happen, and seizing the serpent with some pincers that he held in one hand, he cut off the head with a sharp dagger. The king could hardly believe his eyes when, early the next morning, his new son-in-law craved an audience with his majesty. "What, you?" he cried as the young man entered. "Yes, I. Why not?" asked the bridegroom, who thought it best to pretend not to know anything had occurred. "You remember I told you that my luck must turn at some point, and so it has. But I came to ask whether you would be so kind as to bid the gardeners to fill up the great hole right underneath my window. It spoils my view." "Oh, yes, it certainly does. Of course, it shall be done," said the king. "Is there anything else?" "No, nothing, thank you," replied the prince, as he bowed and withdrew. Now, from that moment, the Arab had cut the snake's head off. The spell, or whatever it was, seemed to have been taken off of the princess, and she lived very happily with her husband. The days passed swiftly in hunting in the forest and sailing in the broad river that flowed past the palace, and when night fell she would sing to her heart, while the prince would tell her tales of his own country. One evening a man in a strange garb, with a face burnt brown by the sun, arrived at court. He asked to see the bridegroom, and falling on his face, announced that he was a messenger sent by the Queen of Egypt, proclaiming him king and succession to his father, who was dead. "Your Majesty begs you will set out without delay, and your bride also. The affairs of the kingdom are somewhat in disorder," asked the messenger. Then the young man hastened to seek an audience of his father-in-law, who was delighted to find that his daughter's husband was not merely a governor of a province, as he had supposed, but the king of a powerful country. He at once ordered a splendid ship to be made ready, and in a week's time rode down to the harbor to bid farewell to the young couple. In spite of her grief for the dead king, the queen was overjoyed to welcome her son home, and commanded the palace to be hung with splendid stuffs to do honor to the bride. The people expected great things from the new sovereign, for they had suffered much and harsh rule under the old one, and the crowds presented themselves every morning with petitions in their hands, which they hoped to persuade the king to grant. Truly, he had enough to keep himself busy, but he was very happy for all that, till one night the Arab came to him and begged permission to return to his own land. Filled with dismay, the young man said, "Leave me? Do you really wish to leave?" Sadly, the Arab bowed his head. "No, master, I would never wish to leave you, but I have received a summons I dare not disobey." The king was silent, trying to choke down the grief he felt for losing his faithful servant. "Well, I must not try to keep you," he faltered at last. "That would be a poor return for all that you have done for me. Everything I have is yours. Take what you will, for without you I should long ago have been dead." "And without you I should have long been dead," answered the Arab. "I am the golden-headed fish." Okay. Ouch. Okay. How many times did you change your name? That's good to see you. I'll try not to blank out on things again. See, this is the third name you've used in here. How many stories did we do? We had 5. Oh, that's not bad. Oh. I'm not even how I'd pronounce this one. Oh, the vamp faces. But seeing as there's so few people who call me Canuncle. Oh. Who's on I can raid? Pause the ads for a bit. Hello, Miss Shadow. Welcome in. I hope that the announcement worked. We were just trying to see if there was anyone to raid for tonight. Because I've got my 5 stories told. So I'm not seeing any other readers on. Yeah, listening to stories is usually a pretty good time to write anyway. I see one reader on. Let's see. Madcrawl is reading Sword of Destiny. Or we could go to Dusk, who's doing art. A couple of people playing Marvel Rivals. I'm always good to be background noise. Okay, I didn't hear the... I didn't hear the alert for that one. But welcome in several DK. So let's see, we've got art and music, another storyteller, what sounds good? I'll get these up just in case. Whoop. Got one for followers, got one for subscribers. Let's go ahead and raid another reader. He's actually playing with figures while he's reading, so that's kind of funny. Oh yeah, let's read him. But more reading. He's having fun reading, so that's always a good thing. I'll be back Monday for more Baldur's Gate and Cyberpunk on Tuesday. Then I'll be back to Bird Conquering of Dead Man's Corner on next Thursday. Well, I might do something else next Thursday because technically it's my birthday. I should probably do something special. But anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful night. And enjoy the rest of the evening, and enjoy the stories. And everyone.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist. Lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play, the echoes of forgotten tales dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and